as to how God is on trial, or how is God being judged. And people have wrestled with this. And this morning, before we go into the study of the two witnesses, we like to bring that to the attention of everyone, that definitely we can prove from the Bible that God is on trial and that God is the one that is being judged. And it's something that I believe, if we look at some of the commentaries on Romans chapter 3, especially verses 3 and 4, and these are, believe me, eminent scholars of the book of Romans, and they have not been able to address these two verses the way it should be addressed. Some have alluded to God being judged, and some have completely left it out. And I believe that we are very fortunate as Seventh-day Adventists that our commentary on these two verses has very clearly stated that God is on trial and that God is being judged. So I have purposely brought the commentary with me, and I'll read from the commentary, and we're going to also have it on the overhead. So when we look at Romans chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, and it reads, "For what if some did not believe? Will their unbelief make the faithfulness of God without effect? Certainly not. Indeed, let God be true, but every man a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and may overcome when you are judged." Now, the SDA Bible commentary reads, and I'm going to read from the commentary directly myself. Even though it's on the overhead and it's here in front of me, I would prefer to read it directly from the commentary, because I believe that it is so important that we get this straight from the commentary and also from the Bible. So in the commentary, when it states, pardon me, when it states the word overcome, and hear what the commentary says. To overcome or prevail, the Greek word was sometimes used with reference to court trials. And when it is talking in terms of court trials, in the second portion it says, art judged, or go to law. Now, Paul has addressed this both in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 1 and verse 6, where the same Greek term is thus translated. Paul,
read from the comment.
Paul may be here, Paul here be referring to the central issue in the great controversy between good and evil. And we must understand what that good and evil stands for. The good stands for the tree of life, and evil stands for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God's character and justice have been, as it were, on trial before men and the whole universe. So it is so clear that God is on trial and that God is being judged. Now we can look at Psalm 51:4. Verse 4 of Romans chapter 3. Dare any of you having a matter against another, this is from 1 Corinthians 6. Dare any of you having a matter against another go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? And then in verse 6, but brother goes to war against brother, and that before unbelievers. So it's the same
Greek word.
Pardon?
The same Greek word.
Greek word that applies in that passage in Romans chapter 3. Now, Paul, note this very carefully, dear ones. Paul takes from Psalm 51:4, when he is quoting Romans chapter 3 and verse 4, when he's stating from Psalm 51:4, against you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight, that you may be found just when you speak and blameless when you judge. So this is how the psalmist wrote, how David wrote. Now, please pay very particular attention to this. The psalmist does not state what Paul stated. And Paul states it in a radically different way. Why did Paul do what he did? Because the psalmist is addressing in very clear terms that God is being judged. So if God is being judged with what the psalmist is saying, and Paul turns around and says, the psalmist is stating that God is the judge, and Paul turns around and says that God is the one that is being judged. Why does Paul do that? Because what Paul is stating, that God is being judged on the basis of how he is dealing with the whole sin problem, the whole of iniquity that came into the universe, how God is dealing with that sin problem. So how God is dealing with that sin problem also places God on the judgment seat. So God is also being judged. Then we go to Revelation 14:6 and 7, and that is one of our favorite passages from the three angels' messages. And it clearly states there, then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. So here, in the three angels' message, it is clearly stated that God is being judged. The hour of his judgment has come, God's judgment. But how is God being judged in this passage? In exactly the same way. How God is dealing with the sin problem, with the iniquity that has come into the universe, and especially on our earth. How God is dealing with that. That is how he is being judged. So if we wrap up this segment of our God on Trial series today, we call two witnesses to the stand.
And as we share some verses with you right now, I found this amazing video of Hubble telescope flying into Orion, and we know, we have heard that that's where God is in the Orion Nebula. So that's going to be replaying for a little bit, so you get a feeling of what kind of person are we judging, or what kind of God are we trying to find out about, this immense, beyond understanding God that we have. So we are going to bring in two witnesses today into this trial that we have going here. And a witness is one who can give a first-hand account of something seen, heard, or experienced. So the two witnesses we have in mind for today used to be in perfect agreement before sin came into being. And in fact, they were responsible for conveying all communication directly from God, from God's throne room to the rest of the sinless universe. All their communications were in complete harmony with each other and with the character of the God of agape love. You may ask, why would the universe need for God to have spokesmen to give further information about God when they were already sinless and perfect? We believe it's because understanding the deep things of God is an eternally ongoing process for everyone. And we do know that the universe lived in perfect harmony and order while being completely unaware that God had a law by which they were living. The awareness of this law came into being only after Satan rebelled against the law. And the universe is still watching and learning from the things that are happening in the great controversy. After all, if they knew all things, then why would the Bible say something like this, found in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 9? For I think that God has displayed us, the apostles, last as men condemned to death, for we have been made a spectacle to the world, both to angels and to men. So these are things that angels are looking into. So who were these leading representatives of God? They were God's spokesman in his very throne room. They were the two covering cherubs, Michael and Lucifer. We don't know how long these two witnesses worked together in connection, in harmony, in disseminating God's character. Because before sin, there was no time. Time was non-existent, the moral law of good and evil. Jesus helps us understand what iniquity is when he says in Matthew 24, verse 12, and because iniquity shall abound, the love, the agape love of many shall wax cold. Iniquity here is the opposite of agape. It is a moral law that supplants agape. And as such, it must be in direct conflict to it and totally different to it. Since agape is a moral law, the iniquity that was found in Lucifer had to also be a moral law, which he introduced in order to replace God's law. So when Lucifer, Adam, and Eve were created with the same character of God, they had the same perfection that God had. Before iniquity was found in all three of them, their natures, neither their natures nor their actions were tainted by iniquity. Therefore, we could apply that passage from Ezekiel that we read earlier to Adam and Eve as well. You, Adam and Eve, were perfect in your ways with agape love from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you when you ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When they departed from agape love, they also departed from God. And if you recall, Jesus had a parable in which he said, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." Once one departs from God, there is no other alternative, nothing else to embrace but iniquity, which is the cursed domain of sin and death. When the couple in the garden ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, iniquity was immediately found in them. Lucifer passed his iniquity on to our first parents when they obeyed him, and we, the human race, have inherited the same iniquity. Now, there are many problems with iniquity if we study it, but the worst is that it gives us a completely warped, skewed view of God. The whole human race has inherited the same distorted view of God, and that is why we are sorting the evidence right now. This skewed view of God means that instead of seeing him for who he really is, we see him as a God of good and evil, which is the very opposite of what he is, which is agape. Once iniquity was found in Adam and Eve and Lucifer, they lost their perfection of agape love.
What does it really mean to be perfect? Like our Father in heaven is perfect. Jesus tells us what it means. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." This verse shows a moral law that is in direct opposition to agape love. Loving your neighbor and hating your enemy is iniquity. This is the wisdom of the serpent, which the whole world has embraced and which the universe rejected. Listen to what Paul says concerning this so-called wisdom. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. 1 Corinthians 1:20. The wisdom of God is agape love. The world cannot know God through its own wisdom, which is iniquity. That is the duality of good and evil. But the world in its warped wisdom thinks that God's wisdom, agape love, is foolishness. However, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this age knew. For had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. 2 Corinthians 2, verses 6 to 8. God made foolish the wisdom of this world, which Jesus spoke about in Matthew 5:43. The wisdom that says we should love our neighbors and hate our enemies, as we have been told. This wisdom of loving your neighbor and hating your enemy is not in harmony with the Father's character of agape love. That is why Jesus says, "But I say to you," with the words, "But I say to you," Jesus lays claim to having the authority to overturn whatever had been said in the past that was not in harmony with his revelation of his Father's character of agape love. "But I say to you, love your enemies." Jesus is continuing. "Bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. This is agape love. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? This is iniquity. Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect." Matthew 5, verses 43 to 48. Only Jesus is perfect like his Father in heaven is perfect. No one else can claim to be perfect like that. Therefore, Jesus is the Amen, the faithful, and the true witness. Revelation 3:14.
Jesus then is our witness for the defense because he is perfect, because he is Michael, the other covering cherub. Jesus was and still is God's chief spokesman in heaven. For us here on earth, he is still that has told us to listen to his Son on the Mount of Transfiguration.
Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, this is on the Mount of Transfiguration, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." The Father spoke to all of us something very important concerning specifically his Son. It is so very important that we pay attention to what he said, even more so because the Father's words apply very specifically to the people just before the second advent. If we do not pay attention to what the Father spoke concerning Jesus, we make Moses and Elijah superior to Christ as the spokesperson for God. Our message to the world must be Christ-centered. Otherwise, it cannot be from the Father, because we will have rejected what God himself decreed. Jesus has to be the final authority in our understanding of God's character of agape love. We must not elevate Moses and Elijah above him as chief witnesses. The Apostle John, one of the 3 apostles on the Mount of Transfiguration, who observed and heard the Father's testimony concerning his Son, declared, "If we receive the witness of men, the witness of God is greater." The witness of men regarding the character of God was given prior to Jesus coming to earth by Moses and Elijah. John goes on to say, "For this is the witness of God, which he has testified of his Son. He who believes in the Son of God has the witness in himself. He who does not believe God has made him a liar, because he has not believed the testimony that God has given of his Son. And this is the testimony, that God has given us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life." 1 John 5, verses 9 to 12. Emphasis was added.
Jesus' revelation of God's character of agape love never changed, even though he was confronted with many different circumstances. The principles he taught directly from God's throne room in the Sermon on the Mount have timeless and universal application for us as well as for the entire universe. Only through living by these principles, by his law, can we have universal peace and harmony. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, the 2 witnesses and their corresponding principles were illustrated in many ways. One of them was through light and darkness. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. About the message Jesus relayed to John, John writes, "This is the message which we have heard from him and declare to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. By giving us the truth that there is no darkness at all in God, Jesus has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love."
That's from Colossians 1:13. The 2 trees in the garden are symbols that represent the 2 opposing witnesses. The tree of life represents God, the creator, the giver of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil represents the serpent, Satan, the author of death, and his dual principle of good and evil. The 2 paths of blessing and curses laid out in Deuteronomy 28 also represent the 2 witnesses and their 2 ways of life, one leading to life, one leading to death. Because the whole world has been deceived, God sends messages and messengers to remove the deceptions that keep us confused between those 2 witnesses and their way of being. Elijah, the Tishbite, came on the scene and presented the path of the 2 witnesses clearly before the people. His message to God's people was, "How long will you falter between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him." Elijah, in essence, was saying, how long will you vacillate between the testimony of these 2 witnesses? The second Elijah also had a similar message. His message was pointing straight at which witness we should listen to. When he stated, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," in John 1:29, of John the Baptist, Jesus said, quoting Malachi 3:1, "Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you." And then Jesus says, "Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of woman, there has not arisen one greater than John the Baptist. This is very important that we grasp what was stated here. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come. John the Baptist was that second Elijah. This testimony of John regarding Jesus, the true and faithful witness, in verse 40, he who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth is earthly and speaks of the earth. He who comes from heaven is above all. He who comes from heaven is above all, because all who are of the earth have had their minds tainted by the false witness. He who comes from heaven, Jesus, is above all, because his mind has not been warped by good and evil. And what he has seen and heard, that he testifies, and no one receives his testimony. He who has received his testimony has certified that God is true. For he whom God has sent speaks the words of God, for God does not give the Spirit by measure, which means to say Jesus had the fullness of the Spirit in him, and no person ever had that. The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. He who believes in the Son has everlasting life, and he who does not believe the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. He who believes the Son has the life-giving message he came to give. So whoever rejects his message continues to believe that God is involved with the death principle. Therefore, God gives them over to the wrong belief about him.
The third Elijah was prophesied by the prophet Malachi. In Malachi 4, 5, and 6, we read, "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." We're talking about the end time. "And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." We find the third Elijah in the book of Revelation, chapter 14, verses 1 to 6. "Then I looked, and behold, a Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like a voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harp. They sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God." The third Elijah message follows in verses 6 and 7, the message that the 144,000 have. "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people." We have heard this so many times. "Saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." This Elijah message, flying in the midst of heaven with the speed of light and reaching the whole world, every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, meaning that this message is going to command everyone's attention. The third Elijah has the everlasting gospel to preach to the entire world. What is the everlasting gospel? Who is everlasting? God is everlasting. And the word gospel means good news. Therefore, the gospel is the eternal good news about the one who is everlasting. It is the good news about who God is, about his character of agape love. The gospel is focused on God, not on us. But the good news about God is also good news for us, because once we understand God's heart, we will know that God is for us and not against us. This is why is this messenger telling the whole world to worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of water? Who made the heavens and the earth and the springs of water? The Creator. So why are we being told to worship the Creator? Could it be that it is because we have not been worshiping the Creator? Could it be we have been worshiping a God whose character is not perfect, a God who has the conflicting duality of good and evil in him? But then if we are not worshiping the Creator, who are we worshiping? This is the same message that the first Elijah had. If God is God, worship him. But if Baal, then the false god, the liar and the father of lies, that false witness, if he is God, then worship him. God has given us enough information for us to discern the true from the false witness. The true witness is from above, and the false witness rejects the true witness from heaven. The false witness is the Antichrist.
Who is the Antichrist? Little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. Who is a liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, he who denies the Father and the Son. He who denies the revelation of God's character, which Jesus came to give us, he is the Antichrist. He denies both the Father and the Son. Many Antichrists have come, either individually or corporately, and they follow the supreme Antichrist message of death. The last example of the two witnesses we want to bring in are the two goats of Leviticus chapter 16. One represents Jesus, the Lord's goat, and the other represents Azazel, Satan, the goat that goes into the wilderness. Notice what the prophet Isaiah says about this goat.
Sorry. Okay. This is what Isaiah says about Lucifer. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, "Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners?" Azazel, the scapegoat, goes into the wilderness that he himself created, a barren and destroyed world, because the world has lived through his principle of death. He contemplates the fruit of his moral law for 1,000 years, while the earth lies in a desolate state. And all who believed the true witness and lived by his law of agape love will have vindicated God's character.
We are living in the time of the third and last Elijah. We all have a message to give that we have received from the true witness concerning the truth about God's character of agape love. No greater privilege has been entrusted to humanity than to bring the great controversy to a close with a message given us directly from Jesus Christ, that God is light, in whom there is no darkness at all. Our prayer is that we will all unitedly move forward to proclaim the eternal good news that God is agape love.